I think my cooking is getting better. I told you kids that deer would taste great. It's even better that the older boys and girls helped me hunt, while the younger kiddos helped me with the skinning and cleaning. Good work all around, kiddos. I'm proud. I'm real proud. I'm sure you kids have been curious about that big sword I have hung up there above the fireplace. I've had that sword for quite a while now, and I've wielded it ever since I got it. I think you kids would love the story about how I got that sword and what it can really do. First of all, at that point of my adventures, it's been a while since I've been back in the Highlands, especially back in the city I was born in, Ulandaar, the capital city of the Sapphire Highlands. I was busy meeting some old friends that were eager to meet me again after I gave them a sappy goodbye the last time I was there. I was back in the Highlands after a year just to check back on things while I traveled all around the western and southern parts of Zoldine. My old house was still there, and I got comfortable pretty easily. If you're curious about the weapon I had at this time, it was an enchanted greatsword I found with a friend around the Calming Coast. Beside it being a bit outdated in design, it was incredibly sharp and sturdy, but not much else. I'm already talking about weapons, so I might as well bring it up. Did you know I always bring a bow with me in my adventures? Probably not, because I never mentioned it. When I was still part of the city watch in Ulandaar, I actually got a repeating crossbow as a gift from one of my friends in the high ranks. And it was actually pretty useful in my adventures. Oh, well, I never mentioned it, because none of the stories I've told you yet have really involved the thing. I said it was useful, but that doesn't mean I had to use it all the time. I've been practicing with a heavy two-handed sword before me and my family even ever moved to Ulandaar, so I'm not that good with other weapons as I am with my trusty greatsword. Joining the City Watch did give me the opportunity to try out a lot of new things though, like fencing and archery, sword and shield fighting, even polearm combat. I was always a step ahead of everyone when it came to fighting, so it didn't take long before I was the one teaching the newbies for a little bit. That was a fun job until the City Watch had me replaced by a royal guardsman, which, was more than fair. That guy and I actually sparred once. My great sword against his sword and shield. I still remember that day. He was cocky and loved to play it up for the crowd, which were some off-duty guardsmen and some civilians. It was a sort of exhibition match, just for the hell of it. When the battle started, he was actually serious. That's when I knew he wasn't just some guy with a rank and title. He was fast, but he had a hard time dealing with my sword when it could actually land on him. We were wearing protective gear, so no killing blows, obviously. The crowd got real fired up when my swing was hard enough to make him lose his grip on his buckler. And then he pulled out the parrying dagger. In 2 swift motions, my blade was directed away from him, and the tip of his sword poked my chest. Which obviously would have been a killing blow if it was a real fight. It was an exciting fight, despite everything. He sheathed his weapon and gave me a bow. I did the same, and we shook hands. Despite the cocky facade he likes to put on, he didn't seem like a bad guy. Can't quite remember his name, though. This does lead me back to the main story, though. One of the friends I made while I was still part of the City Watch did come visit me in my home that day. He was actually the head of the Royal Guardsmen when he came to my house. We had a stroll around town, and we caught up on what we've been up to since we last met. He told me a story about saving a noble family while he was posted in a different city. He fought alongside a knight from the Jagged Earth. They fought side by side, and he even got a recommendation from the knight. And that gave him an opportunity to rise in the ranks. By the time he was finished with his story, we were in the Royal Guardsmen's barracks. It was their own little space close to the royal palace. The people there were pretty surprised I was close with their captain. Can't really say I knew anyone in the Royal Guards when I was still part of City Watch. Even this guy, his name is Parson Wise, by the way. He was still in training last time I saw him. He brought me here for an old-fashioned spar. Yep, there's going to be a lot of fighting in this story, kiddos. You get ready. He wanted to show the soldiers and the ones in training that there were people outside the city's walls that were much better than they were. And that those people could crush them easily if they slacked on their training even a little bit. The way the men rallied and began immediately listening to him as soon as he started speaking was amazing. I could tell they all looked up to him with respect. To be honest, hearing his impromptu speech about The strength of the people as one got me all pumped up too. We are all soldiers together in the battlefield we call our world, and together we will thrive and continue on and achieve feats one man cannot do alone, he said. And those words still stuck by me. After he got everyone's attention, we entered the sparring ring and put on some protective gear. He told me beforehand to bring my sword, and when we entered the sparring ring, he told me not to hold back and to show all my cards. I'm assuming he just meant to show all the moves I've picked up traveling around Zoldine for a bit. But when he pulled out his 2 rapiers, he said, "I am Captain Parzen Weiss of the Arcanus School of Swordsmanship, Master Level. I will be your opponent." Parzen was a wood elf, so he wasn't any taller than me, but the way he stood there with his combat stance was full of confidence and pride. He was also more muscular than the typical elf, too. If you're wondering why he said all that, it's because it's a formal duel. And note, I said duel, not a sparring match. Did I answer back? Of course I did. He wanted a duel, so I gave him a duel. I told him, "I am Einar Yvain, the Rune Knight of Annam the Allfather, self-taught. I will be your opponent." Now, anyone who can tell me who Annam is gets dibs on the good cuts of the deer for tomorrow. No one? Oh, okay. Annam is the father of all giants that have ever existed. They call him the Allfather. The magic that the giants use also come from Annam. I was quite surprised from the declaration of a duel, so it's not like I had time to practice what I had to say. It was just the first thing I thought of. The battle started off with him casting a spell that made ghostly-looking bells appear around me, and they began ringing as he rushed me with his blades. He was expecting me to falter after this opening act, but I kept my stance and ignored the noise. My will was stronger than whatever energy tried to encompass me. The fact he uses a set of paired rapiers in combat baffles me. Forget about the things you've read in novels or maybe seen in plays. Rapiers aren't light at all. And they are forged sturdily. They're designed to be rigid and stiff, so you can thrust a blade through a person easily with good power and technique. He evaded my swing the second he was within range, and then just barely blocked my second blow. He was fast in his strikes, but he was an equally capable fighter. I had to get smart quickly, because I knew that it would only be a matter of time before I mess up reading his movements. I created some distance, blocking a strike on my way out of his range. He was smart not to chase me right away. Parzen was reading my movements, same way I was. We used to spar when we were younger. He knew I was a bit of a hothead, a little headstrong when I fight, even when I try to be smart about my tactics. Parzen was pretty smart himself. Smarter than me, I'd say. But he got impatient when I just wasn't rushing into him in our moment of disengagement. My blade dug right onto his padding and I activated the fire rune. There was a collective whoa and ohs from when the flaming chains started wrapping around Parzen's arms and legs. To my surprise, one of his arms broke free almost immediately, and he parried me with such speed that even with my greatsword, I flinched at the velocity in which that rapier came at me. Because of the force, my sword was knocked upwards, and with all of his limbs free from the shackles, he thrust his sword just one after the other, while all I could do was just evade each strike. One got so close it tore through some of the thick fabric around my arm, and it was after that things got pretty heated. I activated a rune that I actually don't use very often, the Storm Rune. When I returned to my stance, I made a wide defensive sweep to make him stop taking over my space, you know? Because when an experienced fighter starts doing that, he's gonna plan on tripping you, and on the ground is gonna be the last place you want to be in a fight. He created some distance and casted a very familiar haste spell on himself, dashing back with immense speed. Now, with the Storm Rune, it lets me do a special trick that storm giants can do, and that's seeing into the future, even if it's just for a few seconds ahead. If any of you kids have been in a real fight, I hope you haven't, you know how fast everything is when you're fighting. So even if he was moving faster than I could ever match, I already knew all of his next attacks. I parried 2 thrusts, an overhead chop with his offhand, and then for his final attack, he tried to feint me. So, knowing that, I called his bluff, and I pushed into his pace, with my sword ready for a rising cut. He was just barely able to move himself away after that strike. I used the momentum of my swing to completely shoulder tackle him, and that led to a precise lunge into his throat. His sword's only making it halfway to try and defend himself before the tip of my blade touched his neck. It was at this point I was too focused in the fight to really notice what's going on, and what was going on was that the crowd was going absolutely nuts with our little sparring match. It ended with us covered in sweat and looking each other in the eyes, just laughing like the good old days where I would break his guard every time with a power swing, or do something completely unorthodox. Those are good times. We shook hands and we patted each other's backs, still laughing to ourselves, and we played up for the crowd, raising our weapons in the air. Yeah, I guess I would be a pretty good gladiator. Not that much of a crowd pleaser, though. You think the crowd would be impressed by the fight on its own? I'm flattered, kiddos. Now that I think about it, I think this is where the whole Einar the Rune Knight story all started. The mysterious brown-haired knight with eyes that glowed with runic symbols wielding the lost power of giants. When people watch a spectacle, they really know how to embellish the whole thing when they tell their friends. I'm pretty sure there was a rumor that I was, like, long-lost royalty or something. That one was pretty funny. Isn't it true? I'm pretty sure I'm not royalty, kiddos. Oh, but being a rune knight. That is true, yes. It's just that I'm not really used to being looked up to. I'm old. Maybe I got a little wiser over the years. I'm used to it now after all I've done, but back then I was just a guy with a bad case of wanderlust that occasionally helps people out with their problems. I'm not exactly the best role model. You kids make a good point. I did help a lot of people when I was traveling, and they thought I was some kind of hero. Just that being called a hero has a lot of connotations that come with it, you know? An idealized hero you see in novels and plays aren't exactly realistic. Just another person in this big world. I have flaws and weaknesses, and I make mistakes like everybody else. You kids think that's what a hero really is? Down-to-earth guy who just wants to do the right thing? You kids think way too highly of me, I swear, but I appreciate it. Now, before I get too sappy, back to the story. There were cheers and roars from the crowd while we caught our breath. It wasn't just the royal guardsmen watching the fight by the end of it. The city watchmen, civilians, and even some nobles and their servants were watching too. But the most important person in the crowd were the siblings that had stepped down from their carriage to watch the fight. The Crown Prince of the Sapphire Highlands, and his younger brothers and sisters. His father is still alive to this day, so he's still Crown Prince, but even back then he was an essential advisor when it came to the king and civil matters in the city, since the Crown Prince was quite extroverted. And he was here, giving us a round of applause alongside everybody else. Well, kind of alongside everybody else. Everyone gave him a lot of space, as people usually do when royalty are present. Tarzan and I approached the Crown Prince. He was a lot better at presenting himself around nobility. I just know how to address them according to title, just like how they taught me in school, and to bow. That's about it. The Crown Prince talked about how amazing of a display of combat that was. He even asked me who I was and what my business was in the city, not knowing I was still a citizen there. When I said my name, that's when one guy in the crowd said, "The Rune Knight," and so finally, that's where the whole Einar the Rune Knight thing started. When it took one crowd chanting, to start a whole legend about me. And when that crowd was getting a little too loud, I was invited by the Crown Prince to the palace. But I think it had something to do with what Parson whispered to him, honestly. We rode off to the castle, which wasn't too far on carriage. The Crown Prince was a pretty cool guy. He was a bit on his high horse sometimes, but he's not so full of crap like other nobles. No, I'm still not talking about your father. As much as I like to joke around with him about his title, I think he's a good person. I wouldn't let my sister end up committing her life to a person she'd regret on the long run. I'm just that good of a brother. During our ride there, Parson and I were talking about the fight and the kind of magic we used. His school of swordsmanship taught him the ancient combat style of eldritch knights, warriors in the Great War that wielded magic and blade at the same time. It was impressive. I told him about rune magic in better detail than I usually do with everyone else. I kind of glossed over it earlier, but the runes I use do appear in my eyes, briefly when I invoke it. I thought people were exaggerating earlier, but when the Crown Prince asked if my eyes usually glowed with power like that, that was the point where I realized that was actually a thing that happened when I invoked my runes. Since most of my runes only last a minute, it's not like I had a lot of time to look at myself in the mirror. When I arrived in the palace, I honestly wasn't sure why I was suddenly a guest of honor. Having lunch with someone like the Crown Prince and the head of the Royal Guard wasn't just something that happens every day. It was the last thing I expected to happen when I visited my hometown for just a bit of relaxation. The children of the royal family were escorted by servants elsewhere, while me, Parson, and the Crown Prince went outside to the garden. It was beautiful out there. Pretty flowers, fruit trees, and a big hedge maze. There was a table and chair under a tree, and we sat there. The three of us chatted about magic and fighting. Turned out the Crown Prince was an eldritch knight himself, but he made it clear that his combat experience was limited to court duels, where no lives were really threatened. Well, not modern court duels, anyway. What do I mean? Well, when nobility dueled back then, it wasn't for pleasantries or sport like it is now. It was for real battle, where someone wasn't walking out alive. It was usually when there were family feuds, property disputes, marriage, etc. The type of things that were admittedly pretty important, at least to them. We had food served to us not long after we started talking. If I remember correctly, we had chicken that time, lots of herbs and spices, along with dessert, which was a custard pie. So good I remember it until now. It was during that the two finally opened up on why I was suddenly invited over to the palace. The table got real quiet while I was already digging into the pie. They exchanged glances, and the Crown Prince dismissed his servants. With hushed tones, he told me about a problem that the palace had been dealing with for the past several weeks, and with a tone like that, and setting like this, of course I jumped to conclusions. What was on my mind back then was, this is the part where they ask me to kill someone, or, by the gods, someone in this palace is an evil lich. I'm kidding. Well, I'm half kidding. It was mostly the first guess. The Crown Prince could read that from me pretty easily. He reassured me that he wasn't going to ask me to assassinate someone or anything like that, but it was still going to be dangerous. At the very least, you know what? I can appreciate him being honest. Now that I feel more relaxed, he explained to me that he had assembled a special task force to go to the underbelly of the city to fight strange undead. Yes, undead. You heard that correctly. You kids didn't grow up in Ulandaar, but so you don't know about the underground system they have in the city. Keep in mind that the underground system wasn't just a big sewer. The story was that the Duergar, the Dark Dwarves, were banished by the goddess of war Meza for willingly joining the Mardos Legion. They were the ones who built the underground system where, when the goddess of life, Laza, showed them mercy and gave them jobs to show the other races that they weren't all that bad. Even the gods had their own feuds and disagreed with each other. What? Don't look all surprised. I got all of that from Sophia. I'm not gonna act like some scholar just because I have good memory. The underground is called Godelgar. It's dwarvish. It roughly translates to darkness below the city. Yes, I also got that from Zofia. The Crown Prince said that he was worried something was brewing beneath the city, that he didn't have the numbers to send larger parties down there to deal with the undead. It wasn't the Royal Guard's specialties to deal with that kind of thing. He only had a handful of absolutely trustworthy soldiers, and still, they weren't trained for it. He thought a well-traveled adventurer with a magic sword and incredible powers would have a better chance at combating whatever was down there, while investigating what caused the spirits and undead to start appearing. He assured me that I was going to get paid handsomely for the job, and when he assumed I was for hire, I can't say he was wrong. I technically didn't have any job at that moment. So, clearly I took the offer, and they gave me all the information I needed. Which wasn't a lot, by the way. But what was useful was a map of Godelgar. The problem was that the only parts the map had were places that the royal family actually needed to go to, which were old shrines that were separated into different areas in one section of the underground. They had very old relics from the past, that's why they were so important, and were still places where the royal family sometimes prayed in solitude. Another section was dedicated to members of the royal family, or those that the royal family considered to be friends or close heroes. They have it down there as a humble reminder of those who came before them, and the people who had done great deeds with and for the royal family. Or so I'm told. There's also a not-so-humble version of the statues up there on the surface, just with more gold, glitter, and jewelry, rather than the very masterful sculpting done by artisans from the past. What's with those looks again? Well, I can appreciate art too. I do that in my off time. A monk once told me that you can be the greatest soldier in the world, but if you don't have a hobby, fighting is going to be the only thing you're going to know about. Anyway, there's a lot of the underground I still have left to explore outside of what the map can tell me. But I'll have to tell you kids about that another time. Okay, alright, quiet down, come on. Trust me, we're gonna be here till sunrise if I keep going. So we'll save that for another time, okay? Let's go to bed. I'm pretty tired myself. Good night, kiddos. Sweet dreams.